The Tower of London is one of the grisliest landmarks in the United Kingdom, having been the setting for countless executions over the years. But do you know the stories of the people who died there? And can you guess when the final execution took place? Sir Thomas More held various positions in the 1520s, including Chancellor of England and Speaker of the House of Commons. He was also the secretary, confidant, and intellectual courtier to King Henry VIII. More was also a writer, publishing his satirical book Utopia in December 1516. More's religious views were staunchly Catholic, which became a problem for King Henry when he forced his kingdom split with the Roman Church in 1534. The break from Rome was enacted by the Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England, allowing the tyrant king to divorce and remarry at will. The law also demanded that all public officials accept Henry's new religion by taking the oath of supremacy, which More could not accept. When More refused to accept the oath, Henry imprisoned him for treason. More could have taken the oath and received a pardon, but the man stuck to his principles. Before his beheading on Tower Hill on July 6, 1535, More said, "I die the king's good servant and God's first." In his desperate pursuit of a male heir, Henry VIII had Thomas Cranmer, the first Archbishop of Canterbury, annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on May 23, 1533. Shortly before that, on January 25th, Henry had secretly married Anne Boleyn, who was over 20 years younger than Catherine. She quickly fell pregnant, although the child would turn out to be another daughter, the future Elizabeth I. After a further miscarriage and a stillborn son, Henry is said to have lost interest in his second wife, quickly engaging in trysts with other women. On May 2, 1536, Henry charged Boleyn with adultery and incest, committing her to the Tower of London. Boleyn was seen as arrogant by the court, who found her guilty of dubious yet serious offenses. Boleyn was executed by sword just 17 days after her arrest on May 19, 1536. Hers is one of the most iconic deaths to ever have taken place at the Tower of London. The son of Henry VIII's aunt, Henry Courtenay, had been a supporter of King Henry VII and served in the English Navy during the French Wars of 1512 and 1513. As a close childhood friend, Henry VIII rewarded him for his loyalty, appointing him to the Privy Council in 1520 and bestowing roles and titles such as Knight of the Garter and Marquis of Exeter. However, despite this relationship, Courtenay would soon fall foul of Tudor England's brutal politics. After falling out with Thomas Cromwell, one of Henry's closest servants, the king sent Courtenay to suppress the Pilgrimage of Grace. Courtenay failed to redeem himself during the so-called Pilgrimage, which is remembered as one of the greatest uprisings of the Tudor period. On November 5, 1538, Courtenay was arrested on grounds of conspiracy. After a brief trial, he was found guilty on December 9, 1538, and promptly beheaded on Tower Hill. A mortal enemy of Henry VIII, Margaret Pole's death was a horrific affair. Born into the royal Plantagenet family, Pole enjoyed great wealth at the beginning of Henry's reign owing to her title, Countess of Salisbury, which came with substantial income from land and estates. However, her intense Catholic faith, which she shared with her son Reginald, put Pole in a very dangerous situation. When Reginald expressed his stern disapproval of Henry's act of supremacy, the king rounded up every family member he could. In 1539, Pole was stripped of her land and title and sent to the Tower, where she was sentenced to death. On May 27, 1541, Pole was beheaded by an executioner who a contemporary account referred to as a blundering youth who, quote, hacked her head and shoulders to pieces. Catherine Howard met an older Henry VIII as he entered the final years of his life. Howard knew how to get a man's attention, and she successfully enticed the increasingly corpulent, miserable king. They wedded just 3 weeks after Henry annulled his marriage to Anne of Cleves. Howard had previously discovered her sexuality with Henry Mannix, her music teacher, and Francis Derham, a handsome and affluent young man. 6 months into their marriage, Howard is said to have exchanged letters and gifts with Thomas Culpeper, a man with whom she also met privately. Further rumors began to spread, eventually reaching Henry, who demanded that an investigation be launched. Any illusions of virginity were shattered when both Mannix and Derham admitted to their intimacies with Howard, the latter of whom wrote a desperate letter to Henry. It read in part, "The sorrow of mine offenses was ever before mine eyes, considering the infinite goodness of your majesty toward me from time to time, ever increasing and not diminishing." Her pleas went unheard, however, and on February 13, 1542, Howard was beheaded on Tower Green. Despite having died on the other side of the city, Howard's ghost is famously said to wander the halls of Hampton Court Palace, the principal residence of Henry VIII.
It's on this gallery that the spectre of Catherine Howard comes running, screaming for her life.
Known as the 9 Days Queen, Lady Jane Grey was beheaded on February 12, 1554. As her moniker suggests, Grey's curious reign began just 9 days prior, following the death of her cousin, King Edward VI, who chose Grey to be the queen because she was a Protestant. The royal council's support for Grey's reign was challenged by Mary I, the Catholic daughter of Henry VIII, who had a whole army of supporters who considered her the rightful heir to the English throne. Grey's husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, subsequently assembled a host of his own, but the royal council reneged on their support for Grey, declaring Guildford a traitor and naming Mary as the queen. By July 20th, support for Lady Jane Grey had all but vanished. She was detained at the Tower of London, where she and her husband were both charged with treason. Both were found guilty and sentenced to death, but Mary I wasn't to sign their death warrants until the Wyatt Rebellion, which shocked Mary into killing basically all of her political adversaries. Lady Jane Grey was the last person to be executed on Tower Green, which was traditionally reserved for the private executions of high-status individuals. Most people executed at the Tower of London were beheaded, but this method was occasionally deemed insufficient for certain enemies of the crown. Thomas Wyatt was one such offender. Wyatt was the leader of the Wyatt Rebellion, which was a plot to dethrone Catholic Mary I and replace her with her half-sister Princess Elizabeth, who was a Protestant. However, the plan failed to materialize owing to a lack of organization by the rebels. In February 1554, Wyatt marched on Ludgate with a small army, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Mary's soldiers, who forced Wyatt and his men to surrender. Wyatt was tried at the Westminster Hall on the 15th of March and protested his innocence, but a death sentence was all but inevitable. Just under a month later, on April 11th, Wyatt was taken to the scaffold at Tower Hill, where he was beheaded and carved into 4 pieces. In grisly Tudor fashion, his quartered remains were parboiled and nailed up in Newgate, while his head was displayed in St. James, before being promptly stolen. Still, Wyatt arguably got the last laugh, as his chosen queen to be, Elizabeth, survived the political fallout from the rebellion and later took the throne on the death of Queen Mary. Robert Devereux was an aristocrat known for his charm and energy, who was particularly popular with Queen Elizabeth I, despite their 33-year age gap. However, Devereux was also jealous, thin-skinned, and easily irritated by female authority. For example, he once turned his back to Elizabeth in frustration, which was a grave violation of royal etiquette. Outraged, the queen hit Devereux on the side of the head, causing him to get even angrier. As penance, Devereux was sent to repress an Irish uprising in 1599, yet he failed in his objective and blamed pretty much everyone but himself. Upon his return to England, Devereux was suspended from his duties and placed under house arrest. No doubt furious, Devereux assembled a mob of 100 men on February 8, 1601. He led this baying crowd toward the city of London, encouraging passersby to join him in his mission. On February 19th, Devereux was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. As he was escorted to Tower Green, the disgraced nobleman claimed that he was, quote, thus justly spewed out of this realm. It took 3 strikes of the axe to finish the job. Known for his bravado and violent inclinations, Simon Fraser was the last man to be beheaded in England on April 9, 1747. Fraser was killed on suspicion of supporting the Jacobites and their leader Charles Edward Stuart, who was better known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. Fraser's actions constituted part of the Jacobite Rising, which was a Scottish effort to restore the House of Stuart to the British throne. Bonnie Prince Charlie assembled fighting forces to attack inexperienced English troops, defeating a group led by Sir John Cope at the Battle of Prestonpans on September 21, 1745. The Jacobite cause would come to a head at the Battle of Culloden on April 16, 1746. Fraser rallied his own fighting clan for the battle, but the men were butchered on Culloden Moor, forcing him to flee to the Highlands. Fraser was caught on Loch Morar and taken to London, where he was found guilty of treason. Moments before his execution on Tower Hill on April 9, 1747, Fraser remarked, "Dulce et decorum est pro patria more." This is a Latin expression meaning it is sweet and seemly to die for one's country. From 1914 to 1916, 10 German spies were executed by firing squad at the Tower of London. The first of these spies was Karl Hans Lody, a German naval officer who arrived in Britain at the beginning of the First World War. Posing as an American, Lody traveled to Scotland, where he had orders to spy on Britain's naval capacity. However, Lody was poorly equipped and ill-experienced. He was quickly identified by MI5, captured, found guilty of espionage, and sentenced to death. Soon after, he was executed by firing squad at the Tower of London's firing range on November 6, 1914. Lody was the first man in over 150 years to be executed at the tower. Over the next 2 years, his death would be followed by the executions of 9 fellow spies. Josef Jakobs was a spy who worked for the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence unit. Trained in wireless communication, Jakobs was transported to England in the hold of a German bomber on January 31, 1941. However, Jakobs injured his ankle when he left the aircraft's hatch and only worsened his injury when he parachuted into a farm in Huntington. It was sometime after 8:30 and Jakobs was in extreme pain, so he stayed put and chain smoked throughout the night. The next morning, Jakobs was found by 2 farmhands who handed him over to the local police. They diagnosed a broken ankle but sent the German spy to London, where he was held in Brighton prison. After enduring several months' worth of fevers, bouts of sepsis, and interrogations, Jakobs was charged with violating the Treachery Act of 1940 on July 24, 1941. Soon after, on August 5th, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. 10 days later, Jakobs was taken to the same miniature firing range used at the Tower of London during the First World War. He was strapped to a chair, cloaked with a hood, and shot dead. Jakobs was the last person to be executed at the Tower of London. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about world history are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.